Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us.
Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us.
For the last 10 weeks, Stephanie and I have been doing a lot of sitting. In Glasgow, we sat for 6 hours a day with each other around a ward bed surrounded by 15 other women. Not quite like our American hospitals, where we have semi-private and private rooms. The chemo infusion takes about 6 hours once every 21 days. Stephanie sits in one chair with her IV, and I sit in another chair. We occasionally talk, but mostly sit and wait for the infusion to be done. There's absolutely nothing we can do to make the infusion go quicker. Indeed, this week, we learned the hard way that fast-paced infusions sometimes have a negative impact on some bodies because the body can't take in the chemo at that quick pace. A slow drip is often better tolerated, so the drip goes slowly and we wait with one another. There's very little that Stephanie and I can do to change our unknown future. Some people have encouraged us to get a second medical opinion. Indeed, the first opinion was from our doctors in Glasgow, and the second opinion from our doctors here in California. So I guess we could get a third and fourth medical opinion. We gave that some thought. But at this point, we have chosen not to. We trust our doctors and the impact of the chemo and the future surgery this fall to remove the tumor. Not the least, we both have a profound trust that God's hand is in all of this. We are trying to cherish the sacred journey where we find ourselves immersed without our choice or consultation for agreement. Stephanie and I are not unique in the journey we are making. All of us are powerless to know the future or determine our longevity here on earth. Cancer, for Stephanie and I, just underscores our inability to know or control our future. Mary knows she is powerless. Deep down, Martha also knows she is powerless too. But Martha busies herself with attempting to shape the outcomes by her influence. Here at St. Francis, the vestry and many of you know we are powerless when it comes to seeing into our future. The vestry and I try to make wise decisions, but we fully know the future is unknown. None of us control all the variables. There's always that element of risk and unknowing. We would love to know all the answers, have control over all of our future, but we have no capacity to do that. Our world is full of doubt, and we are constantly aware of the fragility of our lives, the temporary nature of our earthly life. Happy vacationers in Nice, France, had no idea that after festive fireworks that their lives, 84 of them, would come to an end in seconds, dramatically altered by a deranged terrorist. Peaceful protesters in Dallas and the officers who enabled a peaceful demonstration had no idea that peace would so quickly turn to tragedy. young people out for the evening at the Pulse in Orlando had no idea that a sea of bullets would end their lives. We have to continue to work towards anti-terrorism, justice for those who murder the innocent, and the protection of the most marginalized in our society. We each have a role where we cannot stand still and wait for God to act. We have a responsibility to stand up with Jesus and advocate for justice for all people. It takes spiritual maturity to know when we choose to place all our trust in the resurrected Christ, sitting at the feet of Jesus, waiting, and when we need to be in an active journey of companion trust, choosing wise actions inspired by the Spirit of God. The choice today in this gospel is the same choice that you and I have every day. The choice is not if we will follow Mary or Martha, but rather if we sometimes will choose to sit with Jesus like Mary, and at other times get out there with him and build up the kingdom. When we choose to peacefully sit at Jesus' feet like Mary, or accompany Jesus throwing out money changers from the temple, or driving out demons, we know the outcomes are always in God's power. Sometimes we do not even have a choice. We just sit or act because God's hand leads us to the choice that we are living. We just follow. Fundamentally, it comes down to trusting God regardless of our choices. We trust God when we sit at Jesus' feet and when we are also active in ministry. We must be very careful not to see all activity in the reading of today's gospel as distraction, as to lull ourselves into the false knowledge that we need do nothing because God will take care of everything. I don't think that's the reading we are being called to hear. Again, it's about being spiritually mature, knowing when to sit, when to stand, when to speak, and when to act. And when to get out of God's way so that God may act through us, through our pain, and yes, through our powerlessness. Mary makes the better choice, not because she does nothing, but because she's not distracted. She's not distracted by the day-to-day details that overwhelm us, that enable Martha to ignore the luxurious presence of Jesus in her midst. Yesterday, in social media, there was something called the Dead Silent Protest. A friend of mine, several days ago, invited me not to use my Facebook or any other platforms for yesterday. So I did so. I made no comments. I shared no content. I didn't like any posts. Didn't dislike any posts either. I remained silent in collective protest with many others around the world as part of an action against division, hatred, racism, violence, vengeance, and social media negativity in our nation. I felt really good about my decision to participate in this silent protest. It felt like it was just something I could do in the Black Lives Matters movement. I felt good until some people suggested, people I respect, that social media is not the enemy, but rather a tool for justice. Friends of mine said, now is not the time to be silent. Now is the time to speak up. And I do speak up. and I agree with my friends in their critique of the protest, even as I was silent. At the same time, to speak or not to speak is not the question or choice before us this day. Dead silent protest, as well as today's gospel, teaches me that there's a time for everything and every action, including the absence of action. Mary makes the better choice not because she does nothing, but because she is not distracted like Martha from the luxurious presence of Jesus. The Spirit of God directs Mary's choice. Mary is attentive to Jesus. When we choose to speak or be silent, we must do so as we listen to the Spirit working in us. I love the words of Ecclesiastes 3, and I read them to refresh our collective memory. You know them well. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace, a time for Martha and a time for Mary. And that passage continues. What do workers gain from their toil? God has made everything beautiful in its time. God has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. The choices Mary and Martha made are both covered by this beautiful passage from Ecclesiastes. And likewise, Ecclesiastes offers Stephanie and me the opportunity to embrace each other as we trust God's healing power through the work of doctors and nurses, supported by yours and many other prayers. Ecclesiastes offers space for our divided communities, a blessing for those who speak for justice and those who pray in silence. Ecclesiastes offers individual people like me and Stephanie and congregations like St. Francis the clarity that our presence in this world is temporal, that is, not forever. Ultimately, after all our wise decisions with the greatest visions and desires for impact, we do not hold the power to determine the length of our lives. The best we can do is to trust that there will be a space for the various times in our lives when we get to just sit with Jesus or when we act. Everything else is in God's hands. On my good days, I celebrate the good news of my powerlessness before God. On my more challenging days, which seem to have been more than the other days more recently, I want to determine the shape of my and Stephanie's mortality. I want to decide that. I'm coming to terms with my powerlessness. But I'm finding in my prayer, I'm finding that these more challenging days are distractions that disorient me from right relationship with God, our Creator, our Redeemer, and our Sanctifier. The good news is our distractions have absolutely no impact on God's vision and timing in the care we receive from God. Mary makes the better choice, not because she does nothing, but because she is not distracted like Martha from the presence of Jesus. The distraction we must all avoid is trusting that all we do or don't do changes God's desire. We are always in the palm of God's hand and care, here on earth and in our eternal life. God bless you.
Amen.